Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome and thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Charlie Farrell. I'm an intern with Miami Museum of Contemporary Art of the African Diaspora, better known as Miami MoCAAD. And I'm also a first-year master's student at Florida State University in their Museum and Cultural Heritage Studies program. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that today is Dinizulu Jean Tinney's birthday. We're very honored that he's choosing to spend his birthday with us. And I'd like everyone in the audience and the other panelists to wish Mr. Dinizulu Jean Tinney a happy birthday. When the brick and mortar home for Miami MoCAAD is ultimately built, we envision that Miami MoCAAD can be a pilgrimage destination for local residents, state and national and international visitors, including domestic and international families hosting reunions in Miami to see contemporary echoes of historical encounters that explore contemporary artistic expressions of the past, present, and future of the global African diaspora. Miami MoCAAD's mission is to discover, commission, collect, showcase, and preserve the work of the most advanced contemporary artists of the African diaspora and exhibit this art at the highest level at home and abroad. Our creative conversations provide a platform to showcase artists and their art and to exchange thoughts, information, and engage in conversations with you. Before we get started, I'd like to make a few notes about the flow of this event. This conversation is being recorded. If that's something that makes you uncomfortable, you're more than welcome to leave this Zoom session and join us on our Facebook at Miami MoCAAD, where we will also be live streaming this event. Our moderator, Mrs. Melissa Hunter-Davis, will be in conversation with the panelists for about an hour. After the main conversation, she will turn the program over to me and I will moderate the Q&A segment of the program. Please feel free to drop any questions that you have in the Q&A box through Zoom and through the chat function on Facebook. Following the Q&A conversation, Marilyn Hollyfield, a co-founder of Miami MoCAAD, will give a closing wrap-up. I would like to introduce our moderator, Melissa Hunter Davis, founder and publisher of Sugarcane Magazine, a Black arts and culture magazine. In addition to being the brain behind a very successful magazine and website that highlights the best and brightest of Black artists, she's also a member of the Miami MoCAAD Working Museum Group. I am looking forward for a robust and vibrant conversation. I will now pass the proverbial mic over to Melissa to introduce our wonderful panelists and moderate this month's creative conversation, Gifted in Black, Miami's Art Landscape 2021 and beyond. Thank you so much.
Charlie, thank you so much for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're in conversation with some of Miami's brightest artists, art producers, and executives. It's my pleasure to be here, and it's my pleasure to introduce them. We're going to start with Adler Guerrier. Adler Guerrier creates visual dialogue between a wunderkammer of materials and techniques. Guerrier improvises between form and function to nimbly subvert space and time in constructions of race, ethnicity, class, and culture. He calls upon the democratizing nature of collage and the authority of formal composition to designate to art history and axis of contemporary identity critique. Rosie Gordon-Wallace is a highly acclaimed curator, arts advocate, community leader, and pioneer in advancing contemporary diaspora art. She founded the Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator as a local and global laboratory dedicated to promoting, nurturing, and cultivating the vision and diverse talents of emerging artists from the Caribbean diaspora, artists of color, and immigrant artists. Keisha Carrington is a communication strategist and arts producer. Her experience in marketing, programming, and public art builds awareness and support for artists, institutions, cities, and global social responsibility initiatives. As Vice President of Strategic Communications at National Young Arts Foundation, she believes in the transformative power of the arts and that communities are stronger when artists are at the fore. Marcus Blake has been a beloved member of Miami's art community for years, creating visually dynamic works infused with a bold, often pastel color palette. Aside from his larger-than-life creations around Miami, Blake's work includes collage and acrylic on canvas, as well as performance art, music, poetry, and other writing. For those who follow his work, it often seems that there is no end to how far his artistic vision will take him. Mikhail Solomon, founder and director of Prism Art Fair, is a designer and arts advocate with backgrounds in art, theater, dance, and architecture. She received a Bachelor of Arts from University of South Florida in Theater Arts and a Master of Architecture from Florida International University. Mikhail enjoys sharing her love of art, design, and architecture with communities. She seeks to use her skills in the arts and design to set precedents for the future of Miami's arts and culture scene. Adrienne Chadwick is an artist and arts administrator who has dedicated 25 years to reimagining art museums. She is the arts manager at Opelika Community Development Corporation and arts consultant with Cultural Conduit Consulting. She was a curator at the Mississippi Museum of Art, director of education at the Pettis Art Museum, Miami, education manager at Nova Southeastern University Art Museum, Fort Lauderdale, and director of education and exhibitions at Young at Art Museum. Chadwick earned a BFA from New World School of the Arts, University of Florida, and an MPA from Nova Southeastern University. Denny Zulu Jean Tinney, happy birthday again, sir, is a Miami-based visual art artist, writer, independent researcher, semi-retired educator, and activist in cultural arts, historic preservation, and social justice issues. He is the co-director of the Dos Amigos Fair Rosamond Slave Ship Replica Project and is active in creating a Middle Passage Coalition network and information clearinghouse for organizations and individuals. Mr. Tinney is a trustee of the Virginia Key Beach Park Trust. Good evening, everyone. Happy Black History Month.
Thank you.
So I want to start this conversation, though we are talking about 2021 and beyond. I always say that if you want to talk about the future and plan for the future, you need to talk about your past. And we have a dynamic group of individuals here. Gene Tinney, Rosie Gordon-Wallace have really worked hard to make sure that South Florida acknowledges the presence of Black creatives in this space. I would love to talk to the two of you about what the Miami art scene was like pre-2010, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with us.
Jean, since you're older than me, I think you should go first.
Yeah, well,
Happy birthday, my friend. Happy
thank you. Yeah,
birthday.
get this out while I'm still around to say something, right?
I know.
Well, there's a lot that can be said. I am not a native of Miami, and I came here in 1974. And at the time, I think it's fair to say that the cultural scene, the art scene in Miami was, I guess from the perspective of people familiar with other places, particularly in the North, quite a ways behind. I mean, there was no major art museum. There were, the cultural arts just wasn't wired into the community. You didn't have that support base that would come from people who have money. In fact, those who were in a position to support it were more likely to support their institutions in the places they came from. So that really created, there was a void, but I think it was also a great opportunity. So that a lot of things that were well established in other places, for example, Kwanzaa, was almost unheard of here in Miami. So it gave those in Miami who were aware of it, and I think back to the late Wendell Narcisse, the founder of the Theater of Afro Arts, who was a major player in raising consciousness of that. Juneteenth is another example, and we have people like Officer Von Carroll Kinchens in the Overtown area, who are kind of having to plant and cultivate those seeds. When I got here, I joined an organization called the Miami Black Arts Workshop, which was based in Coconut Grove. It was founded in 1969 by art students at the University of Miami, African-American art students, who were basically very keenly aware of the fact that the University of Miami campus has a premier art museum, the Low Art Museum, which had never had an exhibition of African-American art. And that African-American art was basically not represented in galleries. It was not being represented in newspapers, by art critics and so forth. So they basically, their first action was to militate to get an art exhibition at the Low Art Museum. And that created quite the brouhaha at the time, but they succeeded. And following that victory, they realized that as worthy as their efforts were on campus, they really needed to have a presence in the community. And so they were able to secure kind of a temporary space in the Brownsville area. That's west of Liberty City, that area, roughly between, shall we say, Martin Luther King Boulevard, 62nd Street, and 46th Street along 27th Avenue, just to give you an idea for those who are familiar. And following that, they were able to secure less temporary space in Coconut Grove, and then finally a more permanent space in Coconut Grove, a storefront on Grand and Douglas, for those who are familiar with the Coconut Grove area. Coconut Grove is the oldest part of Miami. It was really settled, this part of the history is lesser known, by Bahamians before it really became more of a quote unquote white area. The Bahamians were the ones who really provided the knowledge of the local, what kind of architecture do you build for this kind of climate? What are the local plants? What are the, how do you live in places like this? And I'm mentioning that because that kind of history ends up being sort of a microcosm, if you will, of the emergence of the art scene. the Miami Black Arts Workshop, which I was fortunate to join when I got here, it was just very fortuitous that I would come from, in this case, I migrated from Boston, and, with kind of the absurd proposition that I was going to try to, make it in Miami as an artist rather than in other fields that I was more professionally trained for, and that I should fall into that kind of ready-made environment. And the Black Art Workshop really then became Miami's go-to incarnation of the Black Arts movement of the time. The Black Arts movement was, of course, nationwide. You had brilliant critics like Larry Neal and other people commenting on this in all of the disciplines, in literature and dance and in drama, spoken word, and so on. But the visual arts, as always, has a kind of special place and always has had, particularly for us. And I'll just throw in, and I don't want to be too verbose because I'm sure, Rosie has some good insights to share on this. But I want to share that one of our special moments in Miami Black art history was the year that Elizabeth Catlett, whom I'm sure everybody on this call is familiar with, our iconic classic printmaker, painter, and sculptor, came to Miami and spent some time. She was then living in Mexico. And as part of her stay here, there was an exhibit at the main library in her honor.
Yeah.
But I was teaching at the time at Florida Memorial, then college, now university. And I was able to have her go and speak to the students there. And afterwards, she confided that that was absolutely the high point of her visit. But she threw out a question that was very interesting then and is still interesting now, which was, she asked the audience why it is that other forms of Black artistic expression, music especially, thrived and survived as it does. I mean, everybody knows, the most famous musicians and so forth. Why was it that art did not have that same kind of opportunity and expression? Well, nobody knew the answer, so she had to answer her own question. And she went back to the fact that, well, it goes back to the fact that during slavery time, the way the law was written, you were owned, quote unquote, by your owner, and he owned you lock, stock, and barrel, including your time, your labor, and everything else. And so that what happened was that while you could work in the fields and produce music at the same time, the only way to produce art was that you had to have time to yourself, which you rarely had. People found a way to make time, steal time, invent time to do some things, but that stifling effect is something that is still with us, and it still affects, the marketplace, if you will. So let me just throw those out, and I'll just bring up one last name before I hand it over to Rosie. When I got here, I think you could almost say that the Black visual art scene in Miami might have been mostly embodied in a single artist who was a sign painter named Johnny Cool, who had a red and white 54 Cadillac Eldorado with a double Continental kit. And he did signs on stores. He had a classic style. And then he would incorporate illustrations and the like. The Black Arts Workshop, I think, is very fair to say, is the force that established kind of a fine art scene in Miami, and went about the business of not only trying to attract people to come to the gallery space that we had, but carrying art to the people. So it initiated a whole different sense of what art is, how it interacts with the community, how artists interact with the community. So So I'll throw that out as just a basic introduction. And I know Rosie, you have, because you have been right on top of the spreading the word aspect of this.
So I will add that I came to Miami. Thank you, Jean. I came to Miami in 1978. And so I was, Jean came, as again, he came before me. But I want to call some names because Jean gave you the history that we haven't, that we don't usually hear. I want to call some names of folks that had cultural currency in that time. Barbara Gilman Gallery, woman owned near in the Design District. Virginia Miller Gallery in Coconut in Coral Gables. Robert McKnight, Marvin Weeks. These are artists that were around and were working really diligently. I also want to say that the scholars that were here that I could access, Carol Damian from FIU, Purvis Young. Purvis wasn't known in that time, but Purvis was working and walking the streets of Miami, even from that time. When I came here, I lived in Creek Club Apartments across from the VA hospital just before the McDuffie riots. And Purvis was in the hood. You could see his markings by the library and so on and so forth. So we're looking at a time that the definition of art as a cultural marking was different, but it was here. For Black artists, not so much. And I'm glad that that Jean talked about the initiative. And also we have to talk about the African American Heritage Center that was there with Mr. Davis, working with the kids in the neighborhood. So I think that what I will leave it there, Melissa, because what I want to say is we talk about things not being there. We have to also talk about what replaces the things that were not there. And so I'm looking at the 70s and the 80s and saying that those of us that Jah has given a little life to live, Jah be praised for Jean's birthday again tonight, that we have watched this evolvement and it is the definitions that have changed. But folks were working quietly, and not only working quietly, they were organizing. When you hear Robert McKnight and Marvin Weeks talk about them having to get together, these are two guys. One went to Syracuse University, one went to, I don't remember which one, I know Robert McKnight went to Syracuse, coming to Miami and trying to find a place to do contemporary work. So I am not one of the people who say that there was no art. I'm saying that it was more difficult to find art of the African diaspora, Black artists working in organized and centralized places.
So for Adler and Marcus, Mikhail, Adrian, Deja, so we've seen, we've already heard this change and kind of had the ground laid for way things are now. Let's talk about, how things were then. Let's talk about the way things are now. So what does this artistic scene here in Miami look like and feel like to you as you do the work that you do? And any of you can jump in. I see a lot of muted mics. Yes.
Could you hear me?
Yes, Marcus, we can.
Yeah. So I represent Little Haiti. That's my little square of town. And I don't know, the artistic scene over here, the city has definitely changed a lot. But I feel that the scene is happening even with COVID, watching my peers, paint the city and indulge in open mics and things like that. Like just trying to keep that culture alive. Like because we've gotten this far that we can say that Miami is a cultural place now. Before Miami was the party city, and now that we can say that art is a part of our culture, and like I said, myself and watching my peers just put a lot of energy in that to make sure that it continues to be and grow into a more artistic environment.
I love that. Adrian, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to New World School of the Arts for my Bachelor of Fine Arts in the 90s, 96. And I mean, I've definitely seen a change in the culture and arts world since then. I feel like we're growing quickly and becoming more diverse, but I think that we still have a long way to go, and that's a good thing to have opportunity to build upon this history that has been happening here since Jean's days and Rosie's days. Yeah.
So you said that we have a long way to go. So if we had to get to a point where everyone on the stage is comfortable and able to thrive, what does that look like? What change would you like to see? And Deja and Mikhail, Adler, you can jump in.
I'll chime in a little bit. I was actually talking to a friend of mine recently who just moved to Miami. And I remember when I was growing up here, I unfortunately didn't know, Jean when I was in high school or Rosie when I was in high school. But, as I got older, and I actually left Miami because I felt like it was sort of I guess a cultural wasteland at the time when I was growing up. But when I came back, I was like, well, maybe I can contribute in some way. And I did have the opportunity to meet Jean and Rosie and, Robert and several other people. But then when I spoke to my friend recently, he said that he didn't realize how much culture and how much there was to consume here with regards to the arts. And I don't think that was a comment we would have heard several years ago from somebody who was just visiting. So, I mean, that does tell me that there is some progress being made. And like Adrian did mention, we definitely have a long way to go. But it's encouraging to see that we are all here and we have like a very aligned vision through our separate organizations to work together to create a more, I guess, equalized or an equitable arts ecosystem here.
I think picking up on that, we have a high density of museums, curators, arts incubators, residencies in Miami for the size of the city. But what I'm seeing is the Black community really needing to create a sense of interdependence and collaboration to thrive. So great that we have all of these opportunities, right? But I do see us working together, sharing opportunities, sharing funding opportunities, nominating each other to boards, very important, because it's great when you have artists, but it's also necessary to have people in the decision-making chairs who decide where the funding is going to go and also what the criteria is for how that funding is distributed and shaped. And so, I think collaboration now is really key now that we have some of the structural elements in place.
How can the Black community support our community, the Black arts community? We look at different communities, there's so much support, they're going to shows, they're sharing shows. Do we see that in our community? If we do, give me an example. If we don't, tell me what we need to do to change that. How can people be more supportive if they're not?
How can the Black community be
more support to the Black arts community? Yes.
I mean, I'll always say, buy the work. I always say, buy the work, be an arts patron, and maybe not only buy the work, but consider supporting the creative process as well. Not necessarily tying ourselves to an object or, to the output, but funding the creative development if you can, or invite 5 of your friends or 10 of your friends to collaborate and buy the work together. So, I think it comes back down to like resources all the time. And I mentioned nominating on boards, but sharing stories, and then also just finding ways to invite artists into your networks so that your network can be exposed to their artwork, and having a call to action. So not only, giving the artists a platform for their work, but really encouraging your friends and your network to invest in the ideas of the artists, and understand that their time is of value and that their presence is essential to how we create culture and to how we really, thrive as a community.
I also think that, thank you, Deja, because you've said a few of the things that I wanted to say. There's an old proverb that says, one tree don't make a forest. One tree does not make a forest. And so when you think about what is happening in the creative Black artist community, and we're looking at the visual arts because we're trying to support Miami MoCAAD. So we're here in support of that vision and the fact that we don't have a Black museum, and that Marilyn Hollifield is leading the charge to make that happen. So when you look at that, what do artists need? Artists need time. So we need people who can afford to give an artist a year's worth of, I'm not even going to call it salary, support, patron support for a year. So that's the resources. They need the time and the resources. And then they need a place. If you're going to be invited to show in a museum caliber space, you need time to do work to scale. So you need a space. So you need time, you need resources, you need a space. And then the forest is the tribe. We are the tribe. And then looking at the long history of what has happened in Miami, the long history, and my friends are going to laugh because they hear me say it all the time, where we have been accidentally ignored. We have to find a place where we can put our hats that we own. And I did some research before coming on tonight. There are 11 African American museums in Florida, 11, in places that I can't even pronounce. And the big Miami city with the big flag, we don't have one. So the thinking has to be, how do we now not only support individual artists, because that's where I am, supporting the individual artists, getting on board so that we can assign and award the artists significant dollars. I'm not pushing away the folks that give a little bit. I'm just saying we need more. Artists need more. But can you imagine, can you dream with me a little bit in an enchanted time and think of a place that is our own, right? Where we can go in and we have people that look like us on the board, and you can have conversations about what can happen and what needs to happen. I mean, this is like an evangelical moment, right? So I used to, when I spoke to Marilyn earlier about this, I was worried about, can we raise the money? Now I'm saying we have to raise the money because the need is here. There's Jean talking about the 70s, and younger me, talking about the 70s in a different way. The journey is long, folks, and the forest has not yet been built. We have got to get up and do this work.
I'd like to weigh in on this, if I may, from a slightly different angle. And that is the sort of mutual push and pull between the community and the artist. And I'm referring specifically to the role of public art. And by the way, I was sort of remiss as I was talking about the Black Arts Workshop. I really should have called some of the important names: Roland Woods Jr., Walter Dennis, Robert McKnight, whose name we heard, his late brother Donald McKnight. There were George Rents. There were budding geniuses, and Black Art Workshop actually had precisely that vision that Rosie, you just articulated, of dreaming big, of creating this kind of presence, much like what you described, where we have a board, an actual institution. And Marilyn, of course, kudos and commendation and all to you for really doing all that you and your team are doing to bring that to light. But I'd like to get back to the power of art to transform is a very significant key to the kind of support that can be generated. Along Martin Luther King Boulevard, at this intersection of 12th Avenue, which is sort of the most historic intersection along 62nd Street, because that's where the historic wall of segregation was and so forth. There's Shadavia Jenkins Peace Park. It was really a vacant lot owned by the city of Miami that kind of, you know, the city commission decided, well, we're going to call this a mini park, name it after Shadavia Jenkins, the 9-year-old girl who was killed back in 2006 by a stray bullet and became really this emblem of senseless child homicides that had been going on and have still continued. A few years back, a group called the Inner City Illustrators, the names escape me, but we were able to secure permission from the church whose side wall overlooks the park to put a mural on that wall. The presence of that mural and the performing art of executing that mural engaged the community in ways that were, you could almost say, you know, unprecedented. It was, excuse me, it was, you know, if you think about that Earth, Wind and Fire song about, I don't want to feel I'm in the wrong place to be real. Well, this was the right place to be real. This was a place where people were interacting with artists, interacting with each other, parents who had lost children to homicide, people were hugging, crying, feeling just, I mean, total strangers. I mean, I wasn't even one of the artists involved in the mural, and people were, you know, just coming to me and feeling totally free to just spill their guts. They're telling me their all of their, you know, their life stories, and it became such a real space that when, you know, sadly, tomorrow is going to be the anniversary of Trayvon Martin's murder. Yesterday was the anniversary, the first anniversary of Ahmaud Arbery. I don't know what it is about this time of year. But when Trayvon was murdered, because of that mural, that was just understood as the place to where the community gathered. Because of art, it created this space that was definitely ours. It was no longer, oh, this is the city of Miami's property, the sign that says, don't do this, don't do that. It was our space, we owned it. And Melissa, you know, you and I have reminisced, I know I have with you several times about the time when the students from Edison High School came that afternoon to the Cultural Arts Center, and the annual Kwanzaa art exhibition was up in the art gallery. And the students, they were split into two groups. And it was, and I mentioned that because the second group confirmed the first group's response, which was that they were, you know, taking a tour of the Cultural Arts Center. And, you know, they kind of came into the gallery like, you know, shuffling teenagers, you know, hunched over, prepared to be bored. And before Lucius King and I could even get through our little 2-minute speech, already pointing to works on the wall and starting to talk. So we said, well, you know, you don't have to hear us. And we saw those students transformed into very sophisticated art critics, explaining works to each other, asking profound questions. And, you know, just to prove that it wasn't a fluke, when the second group came in, we saw a replay of that. So you see where I'm going with this, that the support for art and artists in the community is going to be generated largely from the opportunities that artists have to bring art to the community. And that's why I've always been, you know, well, long before, I've always been kind of a fan, if that's the right word, of public art. You know, we think about, I'm from New York originally. You go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and there are those, you know, pieces, wall sculptures from ancient Egypt and Greece and Rome. And, you know, they're locked away in the museum and they're lit and there's climate control. But when those things, that's what people saw on their way to work. Fine art, that's where art belongs. And the fact that through for example, the public art and public places initiative that Miami-Dade County has, and some of the smaller municipalities have, it's an opportunity for artists to get their work purchased, if that's the right word, by the Republic, and it then belongs to everybody. So I think as much as we think about the galleries, the grant opportunities, we really need to look at those public art opportunities where our work gets to be not just in somebody's nice home or in anybody's special collection, not that there's anything wrong with that, obviously, but where it really does belong to the millions. And we can go back even to the, all of us are, we weren't around during the Franklin Roosevelt years with the WPA, but that whole initiative, including the Harlem Art Center in New York, that really became such an incubator of art with government support, it still has, lasting effects. So that's one more avenue that we need to cultivate.
Jean, I will never forget that day when those students came from Edison. That was a really great day.
It really was. It was. I mean, the fact that I still talk about it. I mean, it was a revelation, an inspiration, and it just confirmed that what became the takeaway was these youngsters need more experiences like this, and more youngsters need this experience. And we tried to convince the school board of that, but I think over time we become cynical and learn that sometimes when you propose these things to the powers that be, it's almost as though they file that away. Oh, now we know what not to do in order to maintain the status quo, because we don't need these kids being too smart, too inspired, too creative, too soon. That's the cynic in me, but
But just, there's something positive from that. So Adrian is here, and Adrian was really instrumental in making sure that Miami-Dade public school students actually had free entry into the Pettis Art Museum, Miami. Adrian, do you mind talking about that program?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that program is very valuable, and I think that it's important that that all of the museums and organizations, kind of open that opportunity up to the schools. I guess in 2014, the Perez Art Museum was sponsored by the Knight Foundation to provide an endowment for students from across Miami-Dade County to come to the museum for free, and also to receive free transportation. Even when there's free opportunities, though, there still are challenges, because when I worked at the Perez Art Museum, Miami, we would do analysis of which schools were taking advantage of that opportunity. And it wasn't necessarily, it was more often affluent schools that were taking advantage of that opportunity. So I would just do cold calls, look at, 5 schools every month, and just show up at the school to see how I can support, the application process, or to find out if there's an art teacher, or to just let them know, that this is available. I think, somebody had a comment in the chat, and I think that insisting that Miami-Dade County Public Schools has an art teacher in every school, I think that that's important. There's a lot of schools that do not have art anymore. Art education is important because students who may not, be able to understand, or might not find a connection with general subject areas, using music, art, and theater, I mean, that's very helpful. I mean, you can learn general subject area concepts through the arts, and so it's important. And Deja's program has been around a long time too, and supporting young artists nationally across the nation. So that's Young Arts is a great start for high school age students nationally, but also in South Florida and in Miami.
So we're lucky to have Adler here. We're lucky to have Marcus here, that they make South Florida their home. what can we do to attract artists who, you know, go off to university like MoCAAD, but maybe instead of like MoCAAD, actually they go off and they never return? How can we make South Florida attractive for the Black artists to actually stay here, produce work?
It might be too difficult to answer that question broadly. I mean, at the end of the day, this is still America. In a way, a notion of free movement is kind of to the core of what it means to be a citizen. So that may not be a high goal. On the other hand, I think a lot of people are actually moving back, who go away to college and come back just by anecdotally all the younger artists that I see around on the scene. But I think a couple points back on this notion of the public, on this notion of the commons, how art can function in sites that are informal in a way, as a mural inside of a church next to a park. I think that might be the way for the future, for all the arts, for Black people, for white people even, and that we have to go against the structure that's already been established, right? The structure of museums that is, in essence, a couple centuries old, that requires philanthropy from rich people and the state to foot the bill for such structure. Whereas I think from comments already made here, is like, we do know that art doesn't really belong to that class of patron. Art truly belongs to those who engage it, like the students who are freely talking about art on their own initiative. It's like, so I say that if there's a way more opportunity for artists to give their work to a willing audience, right? So there's a structure where artists still function as beings creating artwork and envisioning the whole populace who doesn't have access to this artwork. So if this distribution network is rethought so that art can be in many corners, in many intersection, alleyways, side of buildings, on the 10th floor of a building that's barely used, there's no limit to the imagination. What there's a limit of currently is an infrastructure that sort of presents art one way, in a dominant way, I should say, a dominant way where museums and galleries and that structure is dominant. The other pathways to art are very, very, very difficult. I would encourage us to invest in those other pathways, not just in the established one.
Hello?
You're muted, Melissa.
I'm sorry, I'm just talking. When I think about Deja's work and how in her work with young arts, how you have, you know, teachers and educators come out into the community. So coming out to schools, coming out to community centers, and actually working with students and speaking to students about, you know, about the possibilities of, if you're talented, you know, you can use your talents to finance your way through college, where you can study more and, you know, really advance your career. So yes, we do need to think about how we give the arts. So if I think about my time living in South Florida, and I've been here a little over 20 years, I remember that typically you only saw Black artists in the community, and that was Gene Tinney kind of bringing them all together once a year to do an exhibit. Was it right about this time, Gene? I think it was maybe around April, ended at the end of May. And we didn't typically see a lot of African-American artists around town exhibiting, working with other institutions. That's not the case now. We see folks working out at Oolite. We see that Prism Art Fair is one of the hottest art fairs in the country. It's not just a local fair. You know, people come here specifically for that. Things have changed a lot. And while there's definitely more room to grow, and there's definitely room for change, it's not like it was in 2010. And that's a fact. So what do you think that we can do now to kind of harness this energy that is being given to Black artists and make improvements for the future with opportunities?
Well, one of the things, Adler was talking a little bit about pathways, different pathways, and I think that supporting artists in different ways is important, and something that I'm excited about in my new role with Opalaka Community Development Corporation is thinking about other resources for artists like housing. The housing costs continuously rise, and so I just see that in addition to supporting through arts pathways, supporting artists in general life skills, is helpful. And I see Ulight doing a skills-based program for artists, which is helpful, and a lot of other, I've seen Bakehouse doing that too. And I just think that, teaching small business skills is important, and providing, having artists learn about economic skills and purchasing their own properties or whatever that might be is important. And I think that OLCDC has that 40-year experience in order to help do that, but we also need it in the South Quadrant and the central areas of the county also.
Adrian, I want to just piggyback on what you just said, because the Greater Miami Conventions and Visitors Bureau, through their Art of Black Miami program, they are trying desperately to continue and expand on the tourist TBE, the tourist enhancement program that they have, so that they can share and empower artists with business skills and align them to other opportunities. And I'll use the term pathway as Adler used, so that artists can be confident. A lot of times the artists do not participate because they're not, they haven't had the experience about doing the applications. What seems simple as a business application is not simple. And so those business trainings are really important. Marcus is a graduate of that program, if I can call him out, and several other artists have done it. So I agree. But I also think that there's an elephant in the room that we're not talking about. And the fact that we are Black citizens in America and we have been disadvantaged for a long time has a weight. The weight is traumatic, and the weight is tough. And so, the one institution that I did not mention when I listed who I went to in the 70s and 80s was the Miami Art Museum, which is now the Perez Art Museum. And in those older days, it was not uncommon to see blockbuster exhibitions from Black artists, but they were not local artists. And I thought that what we're focusing on tonight is local artists. We're looking at what happens if you come back from school, from a university. You've gone to these fabulous universities. You come back with all of your degrees and your skill. Where do you go? And that is why we started Diaspora Vibe Cultural Arts Incubator, because artists were coming back and there was nowhere. They would have their portfolios nicely done. Nobody had interest in seeing the work. And so if we're saying that we're a big art city, yes, we called Ulight out, and I give them hula to kudos, kudos and clappers. But where are the others? How is a young 20-something-year-old artist with a 4-year degree, or even someone with a double master's or a master's, where are the pathways for them to go? The same names are the ones that get nurtured because people work with who they work with. So I was hoping that tonight we would be able to say, when we have a museum, this is another pathway. When we have a building block that says, there are 50 acres of land over here. Let us build true affordable housing, designated, not call it arts housing, but designate the housing for artists so that they can get a leg up. Let us give some long-term residences. So tonight is not a night to point the finger about what's being done. What I am hoping to say is, what can we do more so that artists don't leave? And in a pandemic, many of the artists have come back home because they cannot survive where they are. So they're here and they're wondering, and I don't think that the word opportunity should be taken out of the book. The opportunity for artists to build their careers and move from emerging to mid-career. The opportunities are few. They're still few. And if I'm incorrect, somebody jump up and give me some examples. But that's what I'm hoping that we will have. More opportunities for artists to develop and grow. More curators doing the work, more writers, more critical thinkers, more tribe-like, and probably tribe is not the right word, but you know what I'm saying. More communities where we can meet. Melissa, you tried to do that when you invited 6 or 7 of us to meet, and we were supposed to meet every other month, and it frazzled out because for whatever reason. That's what I'm hoping to see, that I see in other communities. Artists forming blocks where they form these areas where they can think and dream and imagine projects together. And that's really what I'm talking about.
So
I won't correct you. I was just going to jump in. I wasn't going to correct Rosie. She said, anybody want to correct me? I'm like, I'm not going to jump in to correct you, but really just to agree and also talk about how we're authoring our own stories. To be an artist, right? It's not just to be a Black artist or to be a local artist, right? It's not to exist on the fringe of the economy or to have opportunities for the creatives over there. I mean, we have already been existing on the fringe of the economy before COVID, and that was exacerbated by the pandemic in which we find ourselves. So how are artists viewed as an integral part of society, in the same way that every time you turn on the channel to see the weather and to watch the sportscast, you're also thinking about how creatives and artists are touching every aspect of your life. And artists are really the ones, I think, driving this conversation around liberation and freedom in a way that's much more expansive than a lot of folks that are out there. So how are those people having interdisciplinary collaboration, in the sense that they're just not sitting with other artists or in museum spaces, but they're also invited to the developers table or to the housing table? There's an artist who has a seat at every board meeting. So I think this idea of really integrating artists into the society, right, and having diverse perspectives at those tables is important. And I call it a table. Really what I want to do is break the table and make something else, right? Yeah. But what I'm talking about is not there just being this revolving fringe creative community, as if artists have separate needs than actual human beings.
Well
And
said.
to add to that too, Deja, I think the words that we use to describe how art exists as a part of a thriving ecosystem, it's always sort of addressed as this other thing that we don't really need to pay as close attention to as, like, especially when you're talking about business. Like, we have economic development arms here in Miami, and arts and culture or creative industries is like never mentioned as an important pillar of keeping or maintaining sustainable society. And it is a pillar that requires consistent funding and support. And I'm often flabbergasted when I go to certain spaces, like important spaces like the African Heritage Cultural Center and the Little Haiti Cultural Center. And, you can just see that there isn't the same kind of care given to these spaces as there is to like a larger institution like PAM or the Bass Museum. They are clearly getting government taxpayer money, more government taxpayer money dollars than our spaces. And so even that, like how we perhaps collectively beseech the government to be a little bit more kind to these spaces in terms of funding is an important thing. And that's quite frankly, that is an essential part of these institutions being able to connect with their communities. And Jean alluded to that earlier. How do we bring public art to people? And you need money to do that. And we are all paying taxpayer dollars to do that every year. So we should all collectively be a part of making sure that, and holding our officials accountable to make sure that we get the resources that we need.
But I would like to add is it's more than accountability. They're already accountable. They're accountable for distributing money unequally, and nothing happens. But I think sometimes they lack the imagination, or they lack the argument to be made for support of infrastructures that are not obvious. So giving PIM money is very easy. Giving the Miami Ballet money is very easy because they're the dominant art organizations. But it's not, an argument must be made to give a small non-for-profit of 3 artists and a lawyer $5,000. And not just from the county, it's also from the state, it's also from the federal government, it's also from various infrastructures where the sort of support that is given to life as it lives here is necessary. So it goes on beyond making a demand for a thing that we already know is necessary. It goes down to, we have to get candidates for political offices who understand such a need. We have to get elected officials that, yes, you have to make whatever compromise you have to make, but at the end of the day, art and culture is a necessity, and some people may even elevate it to the level of a right. There's an idea of many failings in society sort of like hinge on this particular flow of ideas through art and culture, which is a sort of difference than how popular culture distribute ideas. So yeah, that may be one of the things that we can collectively do, contribute to imagining of what tomorrow should be, not just from the standpoint of what are the sort of economic conditions for artists to live, but it's also the political conditions for an artist to live. It's also the larger economic condition for anyone else to live in this county, in this state. We have regressive political ideas that are still being propagated in 2020 and 2021, and probably will be projected, probably implemented in 2022. We have to find a way to make sure regressive ideas are set aside, and that really progressive ideas comes to fruition. And that probably Black people will benefit from that. I'm very sure of it.
So,
There's an aspect of this that we shouldn't overlook, and that is that what we're experiencing as African-American Black creatives is a microcosm of a much larger problem. America, the United States, is exceptional among what would we call them, industrialized, civilized countries, in that art and culture, and especially visual art, is just undervalued anyway, across the board. I've had an opportunity to live and travel in other countries. Art is subsidized. I mean, art is considered, Adler, you said it right. I mean, it's almost like at the level of a human right. This is, it's like food, clothing, shelter, love, sex. I mean, this is a human need. And even a country like Mexico that's not, regarded as being very rich, they totally support visual arts. If you are in any city, town, or village of any size, as they say, if you're outdoors somewhere, you will see art in some direction because of that. The fact that even, and we learned this as early as elementary school, art is considered playtime. Math is important, reading is important, history is important. Art, well, if you're good, you'll do art. Friday afternoon when everybody's dressed as you do art. The idea that that it's not, creativity is not given that value because, you know, America is all about, you know, education is to get a job, not to, you know, develop, you know, who you are, who the child is. So we have to look at our discussion, I think, as part of that larger context that, you know, affects art in general. Then of course, you know, as they say, you know, when white America catches a cold, Black America gets pneumonia. I mean, you know, those problems just get, you know, magnified, you know, when it comes to us. I'll just throw out also, and this might be jumping a little ahead as we look at, you know, when we think about our tradition, long before there was slavery, forced migration, and all of that, you know, most African languages, traditional languages, don't have a word for art, because art is it's a part of healing, it's a part of agriculture, it's a part of tool making, weapon making, it's a part of marriage, it's a part of death, it's a part of funerals and weddings. It's you know, nothing that you do, if you're going to make a piece of cloth, it's going to be artistic. That I think is also what do we call it? You know, these things were born knowing, you got muscle memory, as it were, that goes back to our traditions. And I think that alternative way of thinking of art as something that is just very organic to our existence, you know, when we think that and practice that, then I think that also drives the engine toward greater awareness, greater support, greater appreciation, and you know, just better quality of life for, you know, for all of us. So I just throw that into the mix.
So I've tried to jump in a few times, but I'm happy that we're all talking. But it is now 8:04, so this is the end of the discussion, and we're going to move on to Q&A. Charlie, I'm going to pass this back to you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and I'm so glad that I was able to listen into a brilliant conversation. A common thread I heard was that artists are culture makers. Artists are powerful, and a lot more respect needs to be paid to them and the impact that they have on wider culture, not just, you know, inside the Black communities. So I'm going to ask the first question with that in mind. What role do Black artists play, both past and present, in depicting injustice in their communities and starting conversations on those incidents? And the Q&A is open to anyone who wants to take it.
Let me jump in with a quote from our late Nobel laureate, Toni Morrison. She was, I believe that the context for this was that she was on a TV program in England, in Britain, and the interviewer, I think, asked her something along the lines of, you know, that we don't hear Black Americans constantly complaining about their situation and talking about their history. Is it that they don't consider all these horrible things that happen to them to be important? And her answer was, well, she kind of prefaced it, well, let me answer your question with a question. How can you think about these things and go to work in the morning? But here's her quote, and this is a good one. She says, "There's so much to remember and to describe, for purposes of exorcism and for purposes of celebratory rites of passage. Things must be made, some fixing ceremony, some memorial, something, some altar somewhere where those things can be released, thought, and felt. But the consequences of slavery, only artists can deal with. There are certain things that only artists can deal with, and it's our job, exclamation point." So I just throw that out as part of an answer to that.
Did anyone else want to hop in?
You know, I think about the work of Carrie James Marshall and about Derek Adams, and just depicting joy is an act of political resistance as well. The fact that we exist and that we have imagination is an act of radical freedom. So I think that art by Black artists, by Indigenous artists, by artists of color is inherently political.
Hello?
to-
I feel this. I feel the same way where, being a Black artist, maybe not concentrating on making particularly Black artists, because I feel the work that I make is Black art because I'm a Black artist. It doesn't really have to say that, but instead of, maybe concentrating on making a statement piece rather than, bringing beauty and joy to the situation versus just focusing only on, I guess, the chaotic side, because, amongst all the chaos, you have to be able to see the beauty somewhere. And then being able to do that maybe releases some of that chaos where people might not know how to channel it. So therefore, I don't know, it's like, after the fire, you can plant flowers or just do something else versus focusing on the fire, but rebuilding by making something more beautiful than it was before. And I think that's really my perspective on why I do what I do, maybe throughout the city, is just concentrating on the beautiful part of our culture, or just bringing beauty instead of, um, painting a scene where brutality or, it's already there. So I don't think it needs to be added more into the art to remind us that we are oppressed or violence is taking place. We need to pump more positivity and beauty into the environment. And like the conversation before, just by beautifying neighborhoods, adding color, like everything changes. People respond differently and then respect their neighborhoods because of that beauty that is now theirs. So I don't know, that's one way I look at it, by creating beautiful things, for the environment, for the people, to maybe not concentrate so much on the chaotic side.
Just telling our truth and being honest as who we are as Black people is a radical act. Whether you experienced a lot of pain as a young person, or if you just had a wonderful, happy childhood and you want to express that in your work.
Okay, so our next question, I think, goes back to Adler made a comment about different pathways to support artists. And so this question is, can the panelists talk about chroma as another pathway?
Can you repeat that?
Can the panelists talk about chroma as another such pathway? And I invite the person who asked that question to maybe elaborate what chroma is.
So Chroma is a gallery located in Coconut Grove, on the west side of the Grove. I think that's what she meant. Dr. Francis asked that question.
Well, Chroma has been closed for a few years now, but sure. My daughter went to school around the corner from Chroma when she was in elementary school, so FS Tucker. So I went there pretty much every day to pick her up from school and stuff like that, which afforded me a way to see Coconut Grove daily. I would have loved to be in Coconut Grove in the 60s and 70s, but even in late aughts and early 2010s, I still feel Coconut Grove, the history of Miami is still a trace of it, and still present in on that east side of US 1 in a way that is very interesting, in a way that is partly connected with architecture, connected by the fact that there's continuous Black life there. Sure, it is waning. Sure, there's a lot of what seem to be houses that are level, and now they're just an open lot for no reason. But I think from your previous question, I spoke of a notion of, a notion of justice, even though it's phrased as injustice. Well, the notion of justice that we have to tackle sometimes is the material world we live in. It's like, is a sort of consistency of neighborhoods that allowed to grow, to pass on to multiple generations, to retain history, to retain dust, to retain whispers, to retain stories in ways that I don't want to use the word newcomers, but someone new to the neighborhood can quickly connect to this particular past. So if a place like Chroma was operating, it could serve that purpose. It could be that marker where at least the cultural history of that neighborhood can still exist. It could be a site where the sort of collective work of anyone who's done anything creative, either inside their house or on the street of Coconut Grove, can have an address, and then it can be accessed. Currently, it's probably in private homes and not sort of in a pseudo public place. But at the same time, there's a public library down the street. It does a very good job of actually being a public space. So that tends to be how I see it. I really like the notion of the public as being the most proper place for public discussions and public engagement.
So Dr. Francis clarified that she was saying that as a case study, like that Chroma is closed down, and why is it closed down? Because it's not maybe being supported by resources in the county, but also all of the other Black institutions that need support. Rosie's former gallery and the African Heritage Cultural Arts Center, and the museums that are around Black Police Precinct and Hampton House and others.
Adrian, I want to talk about with Dr. Donette Francis's question. It really is a question around ownership, and honestly, if you don't own the place, when the landlord comes and says it's time for you to go, you gotta go, regardless of the relationship. And so let's look at what she's asking. She's asking us about how would we imagine if we owned a place like Chroma and we were able to invest in it as a community of color, what that possibility would be. And I want to switch the question a little bit to Little Haiti Cultural Center and to the African American Heritage Center on 62nd Street. And I'm actually adding the Bakehouse Art Complex to this. And the reason I'm doing that is we have examples in place that because of lack of resources, and resources only doesn't mean money. Resources means a foundation of a board that looks like the community, so that when things are changing and shifting, somebody around the board would say, well, I don't agree with that. It will also mean that as we teach young board members to step in and sit in these spaces, that they will be able to say, I lived, as Adler is saying, I lived there for 25 years, and now we're not going to move. So the resistance that it is going to take to hold the memory is really where we are. That's the tension that we're at now. We haven't used the word gentrification all night. That's another elephant in the room. Folks that have lived in neighborhoods for 30, 40 years are now not being put out, they're being told the landlord wants you to leave, COVID or no COVID. So we cannot imagine Adler's way of, because this is your work, Adler, of reminding folks of memory, of the streets, of what it is, how it is that a neighborhood comes to being. I live in a neighborhood for 40 something years. I don't recognize it now. The old Morningside, you couldn't be ill in Morningside and people didn't know and come and bring us a bucket, a thing of soup for you or call you to see how you are. So the new neighbors look at me walking these streets for 40 years as if I'm the intruder. I feel like an intruder. So we have to start talking about ownership. And that is why I'm saying, yes, we are concentrated with museums. I'm going to say it because I'm on Jean's part of the fence now. Yes, we are a concentrated set of museums. Yes, we have all these private collections, but we do not have one that we own. Ownership matters. Ownership matters, and it matters in really profound ways. And that is why I'm saying that if we are going to hold on to memories, Adler, if we're going to remember when the mango tree used to be on this corner before the new developers came and took down all the trees, we have to have a stake in that game by putting up our own cement blocks, because that is where we are. And then when you send your children there, you can send them to the community aunties like me and Jean, and the uncles like Jean and I, and say, go talk to Mr. Jean, go talk to Miss Rosie and find out what is happening. Who are you to speak to? That's when that community happens. You look at Dallas, Texas. I've done a lot of work in Dallas. That's what you see when you go to places like that. The elders stand guard. We cannot stand guard, folks, if we don't own anything. There's nothing to guard if you don't own it.
And that's why being supportive of Miami MoCAAD is so important, because now you have an opportunity to put those cement blocks down. But the cautionary tale, the cautionary tale is right. There's no ownership with the African Heritage Cultural Arts Center. There's no ownership with the African American Research Library and Cultural Center. Those are all government buildings. And honestly, at any time, if they want to change the use of those buildings, they can do so. And we can be upset, we can protest, and they may give us another year or two, but it wouldn't last. But you have an opportunity working with Marilyn Hollyfield and her board to make sure that we now have something that we own.
Yeah, and I hear the stories of artists and arts administrators and curators who have all come and gone through the Studio Museum in Harlem, and how valuable that has been over the years for so many different people, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, at first when MoCAAD came around, I was like, do we need another museum? We have so many museums, but I kind of see that it's important to have our own space. And so let's support MoCAAD, Miami MoCAAD.
Absolutely, positively.
Thank you for that. Yes, I definitely think we all should support Miami MoCAAD and for people who are not local to Miami, other local Black art movements, artists, grassroots movements, because as a community, all we have is each other when we have been shown that sometimes the powers that be don't support us to the ways that we need to be supported or want to be supported. So if they're not going to show up for us, then we need to show up for ourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to just say one thing, because naming matters. We just mounted an exhibition at the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm not even sure if the artists in the exhibition understand what that experience really, really meant for a small Black nonprofit to be able to do it. Because we never got a chance to really open, to celebrate the opening. But I must tell you, every time I walked to that building, every time I walked and opened those doors, there was a different feeling. And so I know, I'm saying to you that I'm underscoring again that in the cities around the country, where when you look up on Google, and I did it before I came on this because I thought somebody was going to kind of challenge me as to where this is, and I didn't want it to be Maryland, and I couldn't answer. Most major cities have an African American museum. Most. And it matters. It matters because then after you build it, guess what? We're going to have to support it. We're going to have to support it. And in North Carolina, that's what I saw. When they did their Zooms for their fundraising, people were on there supporting it. There's a nice custard, and Gene is nodding because he knows, a nice custard of African American middle class folks that put their hands in their pockets and support these initiatives. Folks, you guys that are around me know, this is my mantra. We have to support artists that look like us. We have to support work that we enjoy, but we cannot just clap. The days of clapping are over. we have to put our hands in our pockets and make a dedicated support. And I want to just say one last thing. Deirdre talked about boards. I have just been appointed through advocacy from folks like Deirdre and others on her team to the Young Arts Board, Foundation Board, National Young Arts Board. That would never have happened. It wouldn't have happened without advocacy. So let's look at the next gen, the 30-somethings of you who have all of this ability, and start placing you on boards so that the change can happen. So that when Marlene is ready, she's not running around looking for folks to come on board. Jean and I can go to Shady Rest and watch while you guys step in and step into your goodness. But it cannot happen if we just sit back and wait for something to be given to us. We're going to have to put our budgets aside monthly so that when the time comes, we can write the check to support her.
Thank you, Ms. Gordon Wallace. That was an excellent call to action for all of us sitting here. And I think that's at this point, this is what we need for people who are coming up into the art world, because we need to act at this point and we need to make our dreams a reality. With that, the Q&A is over. That's all the time we have for the Q&A. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to the panelists. Through Miami MoCAAD, we've dropped their links to their social media and their website, so you can get in contact with them directly. These were excellent questions. Thank you, everyone. I would now like to turn over to Ms. Marilyn Hollyfield for our closing. So yeah, I would like again to thank everyone who came out tonight. Thank you for such an enlightening conversation. Thank you for the excellent questions. I certainly learned something new, and I feel inspired to go out into the world and act and actually do something. But before we adjourn, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Marilyn Hollyfield for our closing remarks.
Thank you, Charlie, and thanks to everyone here, but I really want to give a special shout out to Charlie. She is a young person who is one of our amazing interns. She and the other interns say, Ms. Hollyfield, the mere fact of thinking about, dreaming about Miami MoCAAD is revolutionary when I tell them that I'm part of the establishment. One of the things that has made this night meaningful to me in a special way is that at least two of our interns are seeking to become curators. Back in the day, that was not something that young people even dreamed about. And if in some small way, our museum without walls, although we are dreaming to have walls, can be part of that pipeline that inspires our young people to enter into the arts profession in ways that they can grow, they can be as smart and brilliant as they are. Sometimes they make mistakes, but they're brilliant. They know more than I do. And I think we'll all be proud to know that the future is theirs. And I just want to say that in wrapping up, Jean Tenney reminded me so much of the important Black Miami art history that few of us know. And one of the beautiful things about this evening is that it is recorded, and thank you for that Black art history. And it reminds me of the words of Dr. Samela Lewis, which many of you have already heard, but I'm going to repeat them. And she tells us that art is not a luxury as some people think. It is a necessity. It documents history. It helps educate people, and it stores knowledge for years to come. In this conversation tonight, we heard about the importance of art, not only to document, but to engage people, to tell our stories, to store our memories. And for those of you who do not live in Miami, I want you to know I did not ask any of these panelists to talk about Miami MoCAAD. I wanted the panelists to be free to engage in a discussion about their thoughts, their dreams, their experiences. And the reason why I wanted that to happen is because Miami MoCAAD will strive, it may not always do it right, but will strive to create that safe space, that safe platform where people can raise their voices, where people can agree, can disagree, can learn. I learned a lot tonight too, Charlie, and grow. And I think as we look to the future, and as we look to, well, where is our art community going? It's wonderful to hear people talking about, well, we need to support the artists. We need to support art making. But in another sense, the flip side of that is civic engagement. Miami MoCAAD was so fortunate to collaborate with the Florida Memorial University Social Justice Institute to co-sponsor a series of town halls focusing on the importance of civic engagement. And I think that underneath all of the issues of accountability, all of the issues that Adler talked about in terms of we have people representing us who lack the imagination, but Brian Stevenson would say they are not proximate. They are not proximate to the people that they represent. And as a result of not being proximate to the people they represent, they don't know what the dreams of Black artists are. They don't know what the dreams of people who love Black artists are. They don't know what the dreams are of people who, like me 50 years ago, struggled along with that Black arts movement to expand the canons to validate and start that process of validating Black art. So as we leave here tonight, I feel very inspired. I feel like we can really get across that finish line, Rosie. And it's going to be before all of us go to the shady tree, as you call it. We're going to get there. And I believe one of the reasons we're going to get there is because of your support, your inspiration. And we are going to think about things outside the box. So stay tuned for the next chapter of Miami MoCAAD, thinking outside the box to create a museum that modernizes the museum experience on one hand, expands accessibility on the other, inspires curiosity about art of the African diaspora, and can find ways to be sustainable. So stay tuned, and I look forward to another creative conversation, another evening where we can showcase artists or exchange thoughts about where art is going. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I wanted, before I almost forgot, I want to give a special shout out to our museum working group volunteers. Yes, Melissa Hunter Davis is one of our members of our museum working group. Another member is Michelle Johnson. People know me and I do all the talking, but Michelle Johnson is the volunteer who makes Miami MoCAAD real in so many ways. And Dale Jennings is another member of our museum working group. And I want to give a shout out to our amazing interns. You've met Charlie Farrell, but behind the scenes are Corbin Graves and Luz Estrella Cruz. And my final big shout out is to Yvette Harris, who's been a wonderful source of inspiration and a wonderful sounding board. And the old saying goes, you can never get there by yourself. We are here today on the shoulders of many, and we're moving forward because many are coming together. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to leave the session open for a little bit if anyone else wanted to chat. We're going to leave it open and hopefully play some music without any more technical issues.
Are we still live?
Yeah. No, we're off.
Okay.
Well, just jump in and say
one day when the glory comes, it will be ours.
Somebody talking?
Hello,
Okay.
well, Jean, happy birthday. And again, thanks for sharing your wisdom, your history, and spending this evening with us.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all for all the good wishes. Blessed to see one more birthday in America. That's an accomplishment for all of us. And as you say, none of us gets there by ourselves. So there's so many that I'm grateful to. And, you know, not because it's, you know, you're present, but the vision of MoCAAD is, I mean, it's so profound, it's so promising. And, you know, I just, you know, give great thanks to you especially, but everybody who have, you know, conceived and nurtured that. And, you know, it's our future, it's our direction. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. It's a daunting journey, but I think I'm inspired when people say we have to have it. And I'm inspired when support comes from unexpected sources.
I think COVID, the pandemic really, you can't say that there's a silver lining, you know, because it's so tragic. My family lost at least, you know, one person. But the fact is that there is an opportunity there. And there are ways in which, you know, projects like MoCAAD, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but there are as much a journey as a destination. I mean, it's very much as much a process as the final product. And so I think the fact that we are forced into a situation where there's no question of going back to the old normal, we really have to look at a proactive, creative future. I think there are ways in which many of us can help bring MoCAAD into existence, you know, in virtual ways, if you will, that will really help to move it forward toward that physical realization. So, you know, I think that that's just one more takeaway from this and one more give back to this that I think we can all, you know, carry on from here with.
For Lori Mertes, would love to see a studio museum type program in Miami. I think all of us would, like Marilyn said. But we can't forget that there are collections of spaces around South Florida that have educated young people, and they turned into professionals in their adult lives and were able to become artists. We have this situation here in South Florida where we don't remember anything, we ignore folks. You know, we're honestly not supportive of the Black spaces that we do have. So, you know, you had Terrell McCraney, who went under the radar for years in South Florida, even when he became a well-known playwright. He couldn't even get his work produced here. So, and that's somebody from the African Heritage Cultural Arts Center who used to go there because he was afraid of getting beat up because he went to a public school and they knew he was gay. You know, so he went to a studio type program. So we have to respect the people who have been here doing the work and who provided those opportunities. It would be great to have that, and I think that we can have it, but let's not forget those who've already done the work and have made those possibilities a reality. You know, it's you can't have anything new until you take care of what you have. And Mother used to always tell me that. When I asked her, I was like, you know, I want to do this, and she was like, well, I'm not buying you anything else, so you take care of what you have. So if we can't take care of the organizations that we have now, how are you gonna get something else?
Well, we can take care of the organization we have now. It's just we just taking care of them the old way. I mean, I have to insist that that is the fundamental issue of it. The fundamental issue is that these are organizations either gets money from private patrons or the state, in essence, and if the state politically close the drip so that there's a lot less money coming out of it, and private patrons on, like Jane said earlier, how early in Miami history, the rich people here, their endowment were back in Cleveland and Chicago and other places. That's still true here in Miami right now. So the question is still, how do we, for me, the question turned again on this notion of the public, on the notion of the commons, of the notion of a citizen. We live in the city. We have to do it as citizens of the city. It cannot possibly work if it's going to be, Rosie said the word tribe and she retracted. And that was very beautiful. We have to retract because that also is an old idea. We are neighbors to each other. We are in each other's lives in ways that is beyond race. It's also a kind of a sided people privilege to only have to deal with people based because we can see. It's like, forget this. The politics of disability, the politics of care, asks that we give up all of this, and we have to deal with people on a base of humanity. Yes, at the end of the day, we still need an institution whose mission is Black heritage. Don't get me, that point is, no one can take that point away. But how we get there, we cannot get there if we're gonna replicate the old model. We're gonna have to get there with agility and with criticality, and political criticality and cultural criticality. And of course, we have to also remember Black arts movement is the creative wing of the Black Power movement. Those things went in hand. The goals of Black Power movement were high: education for every Black kid, safety for every Black people. It's not, Black Power movement did not fail the same way Black art did not fail. It's just that the opposition of what we have to go against is so high. We have to be agile in the way we tackle this, that big behemoth that is history, that big behemoth that is, I don't know, power.
Adler, you're getting fired up. And it's the end. We need an after party.
It's actually, I was fired up 15 years ago on this point. It's like, it's an old point for me, to tell the truth. It's just, it is that difficult. The world refuses to come our way. And I don't know. So I do think an institution that can hold the emblem could be part of the solution. And people will gather, and we'll do things differently.
I don't know that the world will ever come our way, but we need to be there for each other, and we need to work for each other, and we need to fight for each other, and we need to protect those who need protecting. You know, was it Jesse Jackson who said that they're tree shakers and jelly makers? You know, so making sure that you get the tree shakers ready to go and protect those jelly makers so they can get the product done. You know, that's what we need to do. We're not guaranteed to get anyone to come our way. I think we've learned that this year, right? I think we learned that a few days ago with the Ahmaud Arbery. So that's done. If we didn't get it before, it should be crystal clear at this point. But we do need to be there for each other, and we do need to support each other. That's what's important.
Well, I agree with Adna that saying I fundamentally believe that there is enough money to support. There should be enough money to support to make that for the Little Haiti Cultural Center to have everything it needs, for the African American Cultural Heritage Center to have everything it needs, for the Hampton House, the Ward Rooming House, the Lyric Theater, the Black Archives. All of these organizations should have what they need. I still think that the issue of civic engagement is an issue that we, in terms of helping ourselves, need to be more in tune with.
Agreed. And advocacy, I think, I speak to a lot of professionals, Black professionals, and I mean, there's a lot of people that haven't been kind of nurtured about Black philanthropy, just coming off of yesterday's State of Black Philanthropy event. I mean, I just think that there's so many opportunities to just inspire folks, doctors, young doctors and attorneys and people to become philanthropists in the arts.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on that, Adrian. I belong to a group, the BME community, that and their whole approach is not to focus on the problems that have to be solved, but on the assets we have. They call it asset framing. How many Black-owned banks and businesses there are, so that when we reach out to people, we're not always reaching out for donations, but rather investments in in things. There's another side of this too, and I in my introduction, I thank you for, Melissa. There was a mention of the slave ship replica project I've been working on for a number of years, and in our presentations, whenever this question of money comes up, we always bring up just the idea of social priorities. For what it's worth, when I last checked, the cost of a single fighter plane, Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor, without the armaments, is I think $433 million for something that's a military target that can possibly get shot out of the sky. And I think the Air Force reduced its request down to 200 of these. So the idea of what is available in this country in terms of resources, obviously absolutely nobody in this country should ever be hungry. Nobody should be without health care. Nobody should be going through these conversations like struggling to figure out, well, how do we support the arts when what civilized country doesn't do that? But that's a socio-political cross we have to bear by being in a very unusual country that likes to consider itself, or at least the leadership of it likes to consider it to be exceptional and not playing by the rules that apply to everybody else, and creating a haven for greed, as opposed to meeting needs. And I'm saying that not so much to be on a political soapbox, but it goes back to the role of artists, and I'm particularly appreciative of Marcus's comment, it's not just us as artists commenting on what Toni Morrison called the consequences of slavery, but celebrating the beauty, celebrating not only the beauty in our community, but the beauty of life. There was one time when there were political, revolutionaries, if you will, who thought that, well, Black artists, you're not supposed to be painting still lifes and flowers and all that when there's a struggle going on. But what's wrong with painting the beauty of life and flowers? It's what we're part of. And I think giving ourselves that, well, not giving, but asserting or living that freedom is so important, because the bottom line to everything we're talking about, really, when you come down to it, is our ability to produce. Everything, whether our art gets supported or not, or what it means, it's all going to really comes out down to how much do we produce, what we produce, what does what we produce mean to ourselves, the community, and the world. And so the more that we are able to give that art, our heart, our soul, our skill, the better. Back in 1995, there was an exhibition at the Bass Museum on Miami Beach called Alone in the Crowd. The fact that I can actually remember it tells you that it was impressive. African-American printmakers in the 1930s and 40s. It turned out it was more like the 40s and 50s. But that show, what was so impressive was these were people working during a depression, working at a time when lynch mobs and race rioters and that sort of thing were just going around unpunished. And in the midst of all that, they were creating art, and they were making no excuses. There was no half-stepping. You could see the love, the expertise, the dedication that went into each piece. I mean, it was one of those chill bump experiences to walk through. And, I think that's an inspiration for us today, as much as it was, maybe even more so than, for them, back then. I mean, there was an artist in Boston named Stanley Pinkney, also known as Bapalwaye Dele. And I remember in class he was teaching, he said, have you ever stopped to think that in our situation, we actually dare to say that we're going to create, we're going to be artists. And, as that thought sank in, I realized how profound it was that, those of us who have the talent, who have the calling, how important it is for us to follow it and to just be devout and excellent in what we do. And I think that is how we will be honoring our ancestors, honoring our future generations, more than probably anything else we do on this planet. So having this forum where all of us, I can feel that all of us are sharing that is just so important. And a great day for me to start my new year.
Well, Dean, we don't want to keep you too long from your but it's
well, this is great.
A magnificent evening, and it
Mary,
reminds.
if I throw something out real quick?
Sure.
Rosie mentioned that I would get people together for talks, just talk shop amongst arts professionals and artists. And I know that people have lives and families and husbands and wives and kids and can't always make it. But I would propose that we try that again. Maybe we don't do this on a monthly basis. Maybe we do this quarterly. I think that gives people time to sort their lives and put down Clubhouse. Shout out to the Clubhouse people who are in this chat and still here. I know you're there. I know which ones you are. Put that down so we can, talk shop amongst each other, strategize, cry, all that good stuff.
I like that. I mean, we could test it out, maybe set a day of the week, like, and it's, if 5 people come, fine. If 100 come, fine.
Yeah. Hi, Maya. Adler, you down? You gonna join us? Is that a yes? That's a no?
I can't see anybody.
He's still there.
Oh, I have my camera off.
Is that a yes, Adler? Yay.
Oh, there are 30 people still here.
Did you say Clubhouse?
No, I know that there's Clubhouse people in here. Shout out to Maya and Chris. Who else is in here? Those are the 2 that I recognize. Or did Chris leave? Leah, Chris, yeah. My Clubhouse friends are here.
Oh, okay. I'm on Clubhouse. I got click on you. I didn't know that.
Who was that? Oh, Michelle. Yes. Yes, I am.
Well, you guys have to get me up to speed.
I'll send you an invite.
Yes.
So
What?
we'll send you an invite. So on Friday mornings, this is where our podcast is actually going to start, and hopefully I'll be able to get it off the platform. But we do a recording every Friday this week in Black Art and Culture. So it's Friday mornings at 7:30. So you can join us, and then you can join the stage and share your opinions there.
Well, maybe we can just sort of flow out of your Clubhouse.
Yeah, no, there's
That
no
would be
going out
so
of
awesome.
Clubhouse. You never get out of Clubhouse.
Oh, you never get out?
It's
Oh, no.
addictive. You know.
I don't want to get in then if I can never get out.
You know, if you're not in, you're good.
Awesome.
It's hard to get out of it once you're there.
True
Yep.
that,
See,
true
hey, Chris. Leah, I know Leah and I are together every day.
Well, I am going to sign off.
Okay.
I know that there's at least one night owl.
Oh.
Does anyone want to answer the questions?
Oh.
There were some questions that were never answered. Or are we done? Or is it like?
I think we're done.
Oh,
But
the
I
bar is
think there's
closed.
27 people here.
Right. The question was about what, doing this quarterly? Was that the question?
Oh no, there's some questions in the Q&A.
Or there's some more questions?
Yeah, but
I'm going to have to say good night because I've got a proposal I've got to try and get done by tomorrow. So, but thanks to everybody, and all the best, and looking forward.
And thank you. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Pisces.
Bye-bye.
Oh yeah.
I think I'm going to let the next generation carry forward, because I have some. Oh, I see Michaela is saying, "Have a good night, everyone."
Good night,
Michaela. Sailing out.
Good night. Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
You didn't get your questions
We will
answered?
follow up with those questions and try to
Yes.
get them answered.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Michelle, you will?
Yeah.
Okay. I will save them for you.
Awesome.
So
All
yes,
right,
we'll-
everybody.
Adrian, are you
Okay.
still around?
But Michelle, don't.
I have to
end it
get ready
just
for
that.
you
I was
tomorrow
just gonna
morning.
say, you have to get your beauty
I
sleep
need to-
tomorrow morning.
All righty. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good
Marcus is
night.
on, so that's it, and we're good.
I love our little after party. That was so cool.
Yeah, look at that.